It's now 6:30, and I'd like to call the June 4th meeting of the Heritage Preservation Board to order. Before we get started, if everyone please silence your phones so they don't go off at an inappropriate time, I'd appreciate it. Well, I think it'd be nice, we have a new board member that's just joining us tonight, Laura Milford, and just to real quickly, if each board member and the staff would introduce themselves, we'll start with Kim at the other end, please.
Kimberly Other, Secretary of the Board.
Laura Milford. Harold Johnson.
David Bolton.
I'm Cindy Terrapini.
Carrie Page.
Patrick Perez from the City Attorney's Office.
Michelle Wagner, I'm staff to the board.
Heather Earler, Planning and Zoning Director.
Thank you so much. Could we have the roll call, please?
Mrs. Terrapini.
Here.
Mr. Bolton.
Here.
Miss Page.
Here.
Miss Johnson.
Here.
Miss Milford.
Here.
We have 5 members present, and that is more than a quorum, so we'll proceed tonight. The first item of business is public comments. Now, this is for items that are not on the agenda, so if you want to talk to us about something in general, about preservation or the city, well, related to preservation, please, please come on up and we'll entertain those comments. Seeing no one rise, I'll move on to the review and approval of the minutes. This is from our meeting, our regular meeting on May 7th. I had a question, and then I'll ask if there's any other changes. Mr. Perez, if you could look on page 3, the next to last paragraph. I think that's not exactly what you said. I remember the discussion was whether or not we could approve one sign, for the one sign on the building, but delay the other one or continue the second one. And I believe you told us we could not because it was one application. Is that correct?
I did initially, then after reviewing the application, I corrected the statement to say that because it was listed as 2 separate, that you could approve one and not the other.
Okay, so you did say that, but then the applicant decided to move the whole thing
Correct.
forward because of a lack of a quorum.
Correct.
I mean, we had a quorum, but we only had 3 members, which means 3 votes had to all go in one direction to be able to approve.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I wasn't clear about that. Thank you very much. Is there any corrections or revisions to the minutes, please, for May 7th?
Can we hear a motion?
I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve as submitted.
Is there a second? Motion by Mr. Bolton, seconded by Mrs. Johnson. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. So the minutes were approved 5-0. Mr. Perez, would you please give us the quasi-judicial announcement and swear in the speakers, please?
Yes, thank you. This is a quasi-judicial proceeding where the Heritage Preservation Board acts in a quasi-judicial rather than a legislative capacity. At a quasi-judicial hearing, it is not the board's function to make law, but rather to apply law that has already been established. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the board is required by law to make findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the Code of Ordinances in order to make a legal decision regarding the application before it. The board may only consider evidence at this hearing that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues. If the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has met the criteria established in the Code of Ordinances, then the board is required by law to find in favor of the applicant. By the same token, if the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has failed to meet the criteria established in the Code of Ordinances, then the board is required by law to find against the applicant. Are there any members of the board tonight wishing to disclose any ex parte communication or conflicts of interest? No? Any members of the public or anyone wishing to speak tonight, if you could please stand and raise your right hand to be sworn.
Even if you're not sure you're going to speak, it would be easier if everyone would go ahead and stand up now. Thank you.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give tonight is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So sworn. And Chair, may I just say something briefly? Okay, so tonight, their first application is, as we stated previously in the minutes, the applicant elected to continue it.
Mm-hmm.
So the application will be read tonight. The board's decision is to be made only on the testimony evidence that you hear tonight. Thank you.
So we basically have to rediscuss and
yes, as a full,
ask any new questions. None of that carries over from last time?
Correct.
Why is that?
That's the way that your procedure is written because it was continued and now you have a full quorum. It's as if the whole application was brand new.
And it's a new group. All right, so just to, we did have a discussion by some folks that were here, so let's have the full discussion, full comments, questions, just as if, even though it's not a new application, but it's a continued case. So thank you for making that clear. I appreciate it. Ms. Wagner, did you have the staff report, please?
All right. Application 1843 is a request to install 2 new wall-mounted signs on the facade of 13 South Safford Avenue. This non-contributing structure on the southern edge of the historic district is home to 2 downtown businesses. One sign will advertise Neptune Lounge and one sign will advertise Neptune Cyclery. Both signs are internally lit. Pre-rehabilitation photographs from the 90s provide no evidence of original signage. If proposed signs are approved, the building facade will only be altered to the extent necessary to install the signs. The proposed signs conform to all requirements of the Land Development Code. Staff recommends approval of the application for 1 new sign for Neptune Lounge and 1 new sign for Neptune Cyclery. The applicant is responsible for obtaining all required permitting.
May I ask one question just to clarify? So when we did hear it previously, some of the board that heard it at the May meeting, there was some possibility that the applicant might revise their application. Have they made any revisions, or is it the same application from the applicant that we saw in May?
The signs proposed are the same as previously submitted.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies it. Thank you very much. Does any of the board members have questions for Ms. Wagner before we hear from the applicant? Okay, we'll hear from the applicant. Ms. Wynn, you need to come up to the microphone, please.
Use this?
Yes, and please, and this is for all the speakers, please state your name and address for the record and whether you're the owner or the agent or how you're involved.
My name is Sherry Wendt, and I live in Tarpon Springs, 631 Eunice Drive. I volunteer to the city to work with the merchants. I'm on the merchant board, and I own a store downtown, although I'm in the process of trying to move it, but Gallery of Fun Finds. But for the last few years, I have volunteered to try to help our merchants if they want to fix up their stores and take advantage of the CRA grant, because they were very reluctant to try to do any permitting. I mean, a lot of people don't even want to get involved or go down to the city. And it's worked pretty good. We've been able to do a lot of revisions. This is an example. This gentleman came to me. He owns the building as well as being the merchant, and he's been there for a very long time. And he said, somebody told me that you might help me with my signs. I said, sure, which is what I do. And I volunteer for this. I don't get paid for this. And he was all excited. It's the first time he's ever asked the city or worked with the city to do anything. And we've encouraged him to participate, join the Merchants Association. He was one of the gentlemen who has recently jumped in to participate in a new event that's coming. It's a music event. He's working with the group of people and the bands that are going to bring this event to Tarpon Springs and the old train station. So his enthusiasm was great. And in the beginning, we worked with Michelle to figure out what our criteria was. He came up with a sign originally for the Neptune Lounge that I wasn't very excited about. And it come to be that Michelle wasn't very excited about it and said it probably wouldn't be as appropriate to make everyone like it. So I went back to him. It's not what he wanted, but he made changes and came up with something that I loved. I thought, this is really great. Why didn't we start here? So he did do that. And then his bike sign, he wanted his bike sign to be very simple, very straightforward, and he wanted everything to light up at night because he is open at night. So it isn't fancy. It has no other pictures, flowers, birds, nothing. We came before last month, and the hope was that we would make the sign design better. But it's really not a design. It's just a straightforward bikes. And I went back to the applicant, and I'm sorry he didn't want to change it, which would maybe have made everybody happier. But he said he complied with the requirements. He loved the concept, and he didn't want to detract from the Neptune sign, which does have a funky little design. He said then if he put something different over on his bikes, he said it's just conflicting, and they're both mine. I want to keep one a little more interesting and the other one very simple. I can't argue with him about that. So I said, you won't make any changes. I even had ideas. I'd gone on there to come up with stuff. No way. So he said, please go again and try to express my what I would like to do. He doesn't want to conflict the signs. He just wants them the way they are. And I would want to say that for everyone, it's been really hard in the last few years to get our merchants to even consider cleaning up their buildings. When you talk to them about, yes, you have to get a permit, and yes, you have to use licensed contractors, and you have to have a drawing, and all of this, it's really difficult, particularly in the docks. I mean, to bring people forward, and then if we give them a hard time, and a hard time would be if they're complying with the rules, then I'm hoping that we can allow them to have what they like. I do design work. I'm a home stager. I don't always like what my clients choose. I don't even always like what the merchants choose. I might have chose something different, but it's not my store. And if they're complying and they're in love with it and they're so happy, this is their store. And we want more merchants to come forward. I mean, really, it's been like dragging people to this position. So I'm just asking that maybe we could, if we're complying, if we could allow this gentleman to have the signs that he created, because it's not like it's obnoxious or anything. It's just very simple and very straightforward. So I'm hoping you will consider letting this be accepted. Thank you. Unless you have any questions.
Questions for the applicant?
I just want to clarify the sign over Neptune Lounge is a round sign, because on here it just looks very one-dimensional. We're talking about
It will have a little protrusion.
It's about 5 inches deep,
Yeah, I think so.
and then it's lit from within,
But they will both light up.
and it has the either acrylic or glass front.
I think they're both acrylic.
And then they have lettering on it.
Yes.
So it's similar to like the historical signs we've seen where like, I don't like a shell or chevron or something where it's that deep
Yes.
metal band around it. Okay. And then the ones over the bike are a marquee letter design.
Like they call them, I think they call them channel letters. I mean, somebody might know more about that than I do, but they're just considered to be very simple channel letters, and they will be, I think they will be dark black in the daytime, and they will be white at night. I don't know how they do that, but
So it's a marquee lettering design is what you would call that.
yes,
Okay. Thank you.
yes.
Are there questions for the applicant?
I have a question for Mr. Fred.
Okay. Go ahead. You can sit down.
But it kind of, it
All right,
may
well,
involve,
stay up there.
it may involve Ms. Went.
Okay.
You said that those members present, that were not present last time, we are not to use the information that was in the,
No, you are. The decision you make tonight should just be based on everything you received tonight.
okay.
So the packet you guys.
So the questions that I had were discussed last time.
That's fine.
Okay.
You can re-ask them if
All right.
Do you
anything's
mind
changed, but-
repeating that question? I couldn't hear it.
My question was, if we were absent at the last meeting, were we permitted to use the information that was in the minutes from the last meeting too?
And yes?
Yes, the answer is yes. So I'm fine.
Okay. Anybody else?
Questions for the applicant? And maybe this is for the applicant or for the staff. In the sign for the Neptune Lounge, it specifically states that it's 12 and a half square feet in surface area, which I assume meets the city code. The bike shop with the letters, there's no size stated in the staff report. Could you say what the size is going to be, or if
The intention is to maximize the allowable footage, so it will also ultimately be approximately 2 by 6.
is that the
So-
maximum that they could do by code? 2
Right.
feet by 6 feet?
Right.
So that would be the overall, from the first letter to the last letter. So
Correct.
2 by 6, that's 12 square feet.
Right.
I just think we ought to, I didn't see that in the staff report. I just think it needs to be clear that that's what's being approved. That's what any other, yes, did you have something else? You need to come back to the microphone, please.
I was going to ask Michelle, when we did this last time and he changed signs, did you get the picture that had the dimensions on it?
No, I did not. I don't have that picture that
'Cause,
has the signs
wh-
side by side.
I thought I can pass this to you if you guys would like to see it.
That'd be great.
Okay. It does give the.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. You just have the one copy, right?
Is there anyone here from the public that would like to speak to this application in favor or against? Please come forward. Either way, anyone that wants to speak, come on, you can come on down.
My name and address.
Yes, please.
My name is Costa Vaticiotis, 538 West Cedar Street, Tarpon Springs. I wasn't going to say anything, but I know Eddie Mullally, and I was city manager and city engineer, double-hatted as that when he started his business, when he purchased the buildings from a family that I knew as well. And I don't know, it's not in the staff report, but he worked hard. The roof beams were all burned out. And the only thing that was left were the four walls. And one day I got a call from the police department. The front wall of his building, when he had started work on it, literally had collapsed into the sidewalk and into the street. The trail was under construction at that time through Tarpon Springs. And he was very upset because he thought he would lose his historic status. So we worked with him, and I think we gave him 72 hours to put the wall back up as it was originally. There was no window in it or anything like that, and he did that. And I think he's run a very nice business, and he's been a very large asset to the community, especially the downtown, over the past 20 years. There's been some difficulties in maintaining these historic buildings, as you know, but he's done an excellent job. For the purpose of full disclosure, I'd like to say that my wife has bought 2 bicycles from Eddie. So, thank you.
I don't think that's a conflict of interest. Anyone else from the public who'd like to speak? Ms. Wendt, did you have anything else you'd like to add? If you do, you have to go to the microphone. So we got to pick it all up for the tape for the meeting.
So my only question would be, is for some reason it wasn't approved, do I still have the same permission to withdraw? Because I probably then would have to take it to the city commission. I just don't want him to have a no and me not even be trying. I don't know what to do.
There is an appeal process, but we're not there yet, so.
Okay.
Why don't you let
All
us,
right. I
let
just
the
don't want-
board deliberate and make a motion, and depending on what happens, if you need to find information out about the appeal, I'm sure the staff can tell you, there is an appeal process to the city commission for application. Okay, I think we're now to the board. Comments? Questions? I'll make the same comments I did before. I don't think that channel letters are a design or they clearly are a sign because they advertise something. But I think in a design review district, which is what this is, I don't think they're consistent with the building. I don't think they add to the historic district. So I think the other sign is great, the Neptune Lounge sign, but I'm not in favor of the bikes sign for the reasons I stated. And I guess then my question to Mr. Perez is, if the board so chooses, can they separate the 2 signs into 2 motions?
Yes.
Okay. That's up to the board. That's my opinion.
And Chair, also the reverse would be true too. You could make a
Here,
motion
make a
to,
motion for the whole thing
the
or
whole
make a
application.
motion for each sign. Thank you. And then I would just also ask, whatever motion is made, that we need to specify the size because that's not totally clear in the staff.
I have one question for the board.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Milford?
Or I'm not really sure if it goes to the board, but is there anything that says that we have the power to do artistic design in that? Because everything that I read and everything that I saw and researched, I can't see why we couldn't accept that sign. So I'm wanting to know where's the guideline that says if it meets the dimensions, it has to be a certain artistic design.
Well, the guidelines don't speak to artistic design. I'll let Michelle speak to it too. I mean, the guidelines are rather slim on signs, unfortunately. That's just what we have to deal with. And I've just expressed my opinion. The rest of the board can, express their
I
opinion
went
as
down
well.
through the community and looked at all the signs, and there are variations in different signs. So I couldn't understand why we could not accept that sign. If there's a regulation or a rule that I've missed, I don't see it.
I believe that they're 2 separate businesses, really. They're housed in the same building, but they're 2 separate businesses, and as such, as you just mentioned, there's a variety of signage in town, so I don't see a problem with it being 2 different looking signs.
Other comments?
My comments are that, first of all, going from, this to this is, I've
Dramatic.
watched that happen over my term of residency here in Tarpon, and it's wonderful from the times of that bar on the corner that's now Currents to what we are today is wonderful. I think this building is a really nice looking facade to it. The Neptune Lounge sign is a very unique sign with the circle and the banding. I think that's great. Looking at the design of just letters of the BIKES they're called in architectural world marquee letters and inherently are a design in their own right. So it is a design. They're marquee letters. So my opinion is that great. I'm glad we're going to have some, delineation of what is in those buildings and the signs. So I don't see why we couldn't approve them. And I'd make a motion if the chair would hear it.
Is there any more discussion? I'll entertain a motion.
I'd move that we approve the application as submitted.
Bolton's made a motion to approve as submitted. Is there a second to the motion?
I second the motion.
Ms. Page seconds the motion. Any further conversation, discussion, comments?
Chair, did you want to clarify about design dimensions? I know you mentioned
Yes,
that.
I just think it's important that the motion include the size, because the size for only the round one was stated in the report. So that from what the document that Ms. Went passed out today had 12 square feet for the Neptune Lounge and 12.52 square feet for the bike. Would you add that to your motion?
I'll amend my motion to, I move to approve the application as submitted with the added language of the dimensions as mentioned by our chair.
You agree to the second, Ms.
I agree to the
to the
second.
amendment? Thank you. All right, so we have a motion on the floor to approve as submitted with 12 square feet for the lounge and 12.52 square feet for the bikes. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Milford?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Oh, Ms. Milford?
Yes, I approve.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Page?
Yes.
Mr. Bolton?
Yes.
Ms. Terrapini?
No. The motion passes 4-1, so the motion's approved. Thank you. Our next application is 119 South Spring. It's case 18-55. Ms. Wagner?
Application 1855 is a request to construct a two-story addition onto the rear elevation of the single-family home at 119 South Spring Boulevard, a contributing structure. The proposed addition totals 294 square feet, with 147 square feet on each floor. The intention is to minimize the visual impact on the historic structure while making space for the family working to preserve this home for future generations. The proposed addition is integrated into the existing structure and is intentionally subordinate in scale and massing. The proposed 147 square feet per floor enlarges the footprint of the home by less than 15%. Neighboring contributing buildings are larger than the subject property, and the rhythm of the district is not impacted. All of the materials proposed are purposefully simple in style and application, consistent with the Depression-era architecture of the residence. The proposed addition is designed to match the style of the original structure and does not destroy any existing distinctive historic features. The proposed addition meets the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation and guidelines for rehabilitating historic buildings. This project will require a variance from the Land Development Code, which requires a 5-foot minimum side yard in the R60 zoning district. The existing structure is nonconforming with a 3.5-foot side yard, and the proposed addition is designed to work with, not detract from, the original structure. All other requirements of the code and the comprehensive plan are in compliance. Staff recommends approval of the application for a two-story addition, approximately 294 total square feet, on the rear of the subject property as described in this report. The applicant is responsible for obtaining a variance to the minimum side yard, and the applicant is responsible for obtaining all required building permits.
Thank you. Any questions of Ms. Wagner before we go to the applicant? I just had one, Ms. Wagner. Could you just confirm the materials to be used for the siding for the addition are wood?
Yes, so the applicant proposes 1-inch by 10-inch beveled wood siding applied and painted to match the existing wood siding.
So the width of it is also to match
Correct.
the existing. Thank you. Does the applicant wish to come forward?
Hello. So we had originally planned to do just an upstairs.
Could you please state your name and?
Sorry, Elizabeth Parker, 119 South Spring Boulevard, Tarpon Springs.
And Matt Turpin, her husband's name, address.
So we had originally planned to do this 2.5 years ago, and just do the upstairs. And we had an approval from the board at that time. And then we went to find contractors and kind of got a sticker shock. And the last contractor we got said, why don't you just enclose the downstairs too? Because then it won't cost much more and you'll get twice the space. So we spent some time, we've lived in the house 4 years now. Yeah. And we feel like we know this house pretty well. And we want to respect its original design. We love the house and the front porch especially. So this is our modest proposal to minimally enhance it. We have really small bedrooms, closets, bathrooms. So we respectfully ask that you approve.
Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, the house is listed to have 2 or a 1.5 bathroom. The half bathroom is barely 4 by 3. You literally have to ease under the sink to sit on the
I had one of those. I could get
It
rid
really
of.
doesn't have a real second bathroom. And say we decide we're too big for this house and we wanted to sell it. I don't know what we would do. We'd have to completely do something to that bathroom, either cannibalize part of the already small kitchen, or unless we had an addition, of course, we wouldn't have that problem.
Any questions of the applicant? Thank you so much. Appreciate it. We'll open it now to the public hearing portion. If anyone wants to speak in favor or opposed to this application, please come forward. Seeing no one rise, it's to the board. Comments, questions? Seems to me like a really good application. I mean, using the same materials, and siding is matching, and doing it like a good job.
You hear a motion?
I'm ready for a motion.
Motion to approve as submitted.
Motion by Mr. Bolton, seconded by Ms. Johnson. Further discussion by the board? Madam Secretary, would you call the roll, please?
Miss Milford,
Yes.
Miss Johnson,
Yes.
Miss Page,
Yes.
Mr. Bolton,
Yes.
Mrs. Terrapini.
Yes. The motion it's approved 5-0. Congratulations. Don't forget to get your building permit, or get your contract to get your building permit. All right, thank you so much. You don't need to stay unless you want to, but you're welcome to stay if you wish. Okay, our third application tonight is application 1844, 101 South Pinellas, Old City Hall. Staff, Ms. Wagner, would you like to make the presentation?
Application 1844 is a request by the City of Tarpon Springs to replace all 38 windows with historically appropriate aluminum-clad wood replacement windows at 101 South Pinellas Avenue, a contributing structure. Project Administration Department Director Bob Robertson will discuss the professional window assessment report dated February 22nd, 2018 momentarily. Overall, building longevity is the overarching concern for the Tarpon Springs Cultural Center. As our historic city hall, a prominent building on the main thoroughfare through the district, and home to future cultural exhibits and activities for our community and our visitors, the building, where it is sited, is a critical resource for future generations to connect to Tarpon Springs. There is not, nor is it anticipated there will be, capacity to properly maintain historic wooden windows on a recurring schedule or even during some emergency events. It is through this holistic lens that staff recommends approval for the window replacement for all 38 windows. The applicant will be responsible for obtaining all required permits, and the applicant shall maintain at least one best example of an original window in its entirety as a permanent exhibit. This exhibit should include documentary and pictorial evidence of the window replacement as part of the overall building rehabilitation related to previously approved Certificate of Approval 17-144.
Thank you, Ms. Wagner. Any comments or, questions for the staff before we hear from the applicant?
I have a question on There was a 2-page letter kind of giving a narrative description, A, B, and C paragraphs. And then on the second page, second paragraph, it kind of narrates the history of the building. And then it says, it has one sentence that says, at that time, the building was renovated for use as a cultural arts center in 1987. And my understanding is that was a, can you speak to what kind of renovation that was? It doesn't.
Are you referring to Ms. Salaga's report?
No, he's looking
No, this is
at the report from the Historic Sites Survey, I believe.
Yes,
What it
it's page 3 and 4 of
The master site file?
master site file.
Okay.
So can you just speak to what was the renovation done in 1987 that was a grant was used for it? What was done and what was the condition of the building at that time?
So I have very little knowledge of that project. Actually, there are probably other people here who could answer more about it. I know that there was window film applied during that time. I think that there was window film applied during that time for the solar heat gain. I'm not sure everything that was done.
Okay. Can you speak to the termite policy that's in place, how often the building was inspected for termites, and when the last treatment for termites was done on that building?
I cannot.
Do you know if there's a report or any evidence of yearly inspections of that building? What I'm getting at is in 1987, the building was completely renovated, from my understanding. And now we're using evidence of termite damage, lack of maintenance, as a reason to potentially remove all of the historic nature of these openings. And I'm having some trouble with that. So I'm trying to put it on record.
I understand.
Thank you.
If Ms. Wagner doesn't know, perhaps the applicant might know when we
The
get to that
applicant,
point.
okay. Thank you. I think
Yeah.
that's it for right now. Thank you.
Any other questions of the staff? Okay, we'll open up to the applicant, Mr. Robertson, I assume?
That's me, yes. Good evening, I'm Bob Robertson. I'm the Project Administration Department Director and for the city. I work for the city, and I'm representing the city for this application. As Michelle's report states, we're here tonight seeking a certificate of approval for a recommendation to replace the windows at the Cultural Center with wind load and impact-rated historically accurate replicate windows. And just in quick summary, back in January, the city requested this board's approval of several restoration and repair activities. I won't go through the list because it's a long one, but replacing the windows was included in that list. All of those items were approved by this board with the exception of the replacement of the windows, so that's why we're here tonight, just for that single item. At that time, board members felt that detailed information supporting a recommendation to replace the windows had not been provided. So since that meeting, a detailed window condition assessment addressing each of the 38 windows individually has been conducted by Atelier Architecture, and Vivian Salaga is here tonight to answer questions about that report if needed. A copy of the full assessment report and a staff memo summarizing the conclusions of that report, along with other supporting documents, was included in your backup for this agenda item. So a quick snapshot of some of the information of that report. I'll read through a little bit here. Each of the 38 windows at the Cultural Center was thoroughly evaluated based on several factors, including window operability, termite damage, wood rot, glazing compound and glass condition, the condition of the frame, sill, and caulking, and more. Each window was given a condition rating ranging from very poor, poor, fair, good, or very good. 13 of those 38 were classified as fair, 17 were classified as poor, and 8 were classified as very poor. No windows were classified as good or very good. So of the 38 windows, 25 received a poor or very poor rating. That's 65% of the windows. So again, we're here tonight seeking a certificate of approval. And again, I'm here for questions. Vivian's here, and Mr. Funchen, Public Works Director, is also here.
I do have some questions for you, and then I have quite a few questions for Ms. Salaga. Perhaps we could ask our questions of Mr. Robertson first. Does that make sense? And
That's
then-
fine.
Then we'll move on to Ms. Salaga. Mr. Robertson, I'm looking at your memo that's dated April 5th.
Mhm.
And I have a couple questions about that, but what is the city's maintenance schedule for the old City Hall building?
I think that Public Works Director might be better suited to address that, but I will say this, I've recently directed a member of my staff to begin an annual assessment on all of his city historic buildings. He has started putting together a plan to do that, in which we'll look at these things annually and come up with a list of items that may need to be addressed and hopefully start scoping out some of the work on a little bit more of a regular basis. I think right now it's mostly on a responsive need.
So there's no regular routine maintenance of this historic building? Is that what you're saying?
Tom can speak to that.
Tom Funchen, Public Works Director. There is routine maintenance on all our buildings here.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I'm sorry. We do routine maintenance throughout the whole year. Anytime we're touching this building, whether it's looking at roofs, at flooring, at electrical, it's consistently done.
Well,
just
if
part of
there's
the
been a
regular work.
routine maintenance, why haven't your staff identified this deterioration in these buildings since in all these years? Apparently it's just been deteriorating, nothing's been done.
Yes, it has, but we started this process back in 2005 with the original director of that department, looking at back in 2005, 2006, to start doing some repairs onto it, hopefully, that within a few years after that, we could get all this work done. It's been a lot long progress than we would liked.
So what was done since 2005 on the windows specifically, since that's what we're talking about?
There were some door replacements. There was the rebuilding of the clock tower internally. There were some issues with that. There was some ceiling repairs done inside. We've had corked the windows a number of times as general maintenance to try to keep any infiltration of moisture. That work was done.
I don't understand. What repair was done to the windows, please?
We corked some of the windows, recorked some windows, glazed some of the windows.
On the glass, you're talking?
On the glass, yes.
Okay. So that's the only maintenance work that's been done is the glass?
Well, there was a door repair. There was
I'm talking
actually
just windows, because we've already, the other renovations have already come through the board. Tonight, we're only focused on windows, so.
right. Just a couple of areas that they corked to keep the moisture out of it. Yes, ma'am.
And do you termite the building on a regular basis?
Not on a regular basis when we feel we need it. That came up in the original discussions, but we thought with putting all the work into rebuilding the building or reconditioning it, at the time we weren't going forward with it because we're hoping that the process of rebuilding would be accomplished much quicker.
And do you know when the last time the building was termited?
No, that I don't know. It was before I took over building maintenance.
I'm sorry?
It was prior to me.
And when did you come to the city?
Well, I've been in the city since 2002. I took over building maintenance 2005.
So since at least 2002, the building has not been tinted or terminated?
Not that I know of, no.
Yeah, it's my.
I have a clarification because I'm a little bit confused because following our last meeting, I made a public records request from the city requesting all maintenance documents that have been record keeping for that building or any historical structure within the historic district of Tarpon Springs. I was notified that there are no regular maintenance scheduled for any of the city buildings. There is no line item or budget for any of those things, and the city staff actually stated in the letter back to me was that we don't have time to go out looking for extra work. I also met with this gentleman and with this city manager who confirmed the results of that records request, that there is no documented inspections on our buildings yearly, that there is no maintenance record for any of the buildings, and that when the air filters are replaced on a 60-day basis, whoever replaces the air filters at that time will notify somebody at the city if they recognize something that needs to be done. To that effect, there was also no routine or comprehensive inspection done of any of the buildings following Hurricane Irma. So I'm a little bit confused on your testimony this evening from what I've already been told by the city manager directly and from a private meeting with the gentleman that just stepped up prior to you. So I don't think we've maintained this building, or this is just questions for you. So there is no termite reports. There was no termite treatment. The building was restored in 1987 back to its as close as could be its original condition. And since 1987, we've allowed the wood around the clock tower to deteriorate and fall off. We've allowed termites to infest the building, and we've allowed water damage to destroy the windows. And now we're asking for our lack of diligence to wholesalely rip out the windows that we let deteriorate. So that's my opinion.
Any more questions for Mr. Funchen? I do have a couple questions for Mr. Robertson, if you wouldn't mind, and then the board may also. Mr. Robertson, I'm looking at your memo dated April 5th. It's directed to Mr. LaCourse, and it was included in our package.
Right.
And on the second page, there's a table with 7 different options. First of all, I would say that price is really not the criteria by which we make a decision. Although there is some language in the design guidelines about something is not economically feasible, so I assume this is your attempt to respond to that issue. My question on option number 7, which is complete replacement with historically accurate replicas, and it gives a cost, but the cost in the notes it says, and I believe this applies to all 7 options. It says, and I quote, restoration and product costs only, excluding sales tax and installation charges. Well, on option 7, complete replacement, would there not be installation charges and costs associated that you would pay the contractor to put the windows in?
Sure. I think the idea here was to just present comparable numbers with the assumption that if you took a window out and restored it, it's going to cost the same to put it back in versus putting a new window back in.
Well, you just said there would be an installation charge, which you did not include in this, so it's not, you're not really comparing orange to apples. It's an apples to oranges analysis.
No, what I'm saying is the installation charges are not included in any of these numbers.
Well, then the whole analysis, financial analysis, is no good, quite frankly.
Well, again, if it's the same number, then you're comparing them all. So I understand your point.
No, let's talk about specifically. If a restoration, there's going to be cost to buy new wood. There's going to be a good deal of labor to do physically restore those windows.
Right.
And then you're going to put that window back in. And then let's just do 1 and 7 because the other ones are kind of permutations or side examples. In option 7, so in option 1, you haven't included installation to putting the window back in, or have you?
Correct. It's not included, as it's also not included. It's also not included in option 7.
Yeah, the labor to repair the window, but it's sitting out on the street. It hasn't been put back in, and you're costing it.
Right.
And then on number 7, you're going to have complete replacement. You only included the cost of the window, and you have a much more higher cost to put that window in because you're going to have to do other adjustments to the frame, to the where the window sits, to the building to be able to accommodate that new window, and you haven't accommodated that in your cost. Is that right?
Vivian did look at those numbers, and I did talk to her about that. I think the idea is, as I said, the work required to take a window out and put it back in is going to be the same. Obviously, when you take the window out and try to restore one, that's going to be more expensive. So that's what that number is, the 101,400. Vivian did the cost estimate. We can talk to her about some of the details if you want. But as you've said, the cost isn't really that important. The primary purpose of putting it in here was to show that it's basically the same doing it either way.
So you're saying that the cost to replace those windows is $2,726 per window?
I guess that's what the numbers come out to be. Yeah.
I thought I remembered a much higher number for the actual, even buying the window when we had our meeting in January when the contractor came, and I don't remember what it was.
Higher, but
Again, this is the number for materials only, right? Yeah.
Well, I still think that you this is still really an apples to oranges analysis. If you want us to look at that it's not economically feasible to restore the windows, you've got to take in all the costs for all the options and then compare that, and you haven't done it.
That's really not the point I think we're trying to make. It's just that trying to get your authorization or approval for the certificate of approval, to replace the windows.
So you're
And
not
the
arguing
costs,
that
you've
it's,
already said that costs don't really matter that much. It's not really that important in figuring which way to go. I think you said that at the last meeting. So if that's,
part of our
that's-
criteria, but there is a
right.
part, if you as the applicant are trying to make a point that it's not economically feasible, your analysis hasn't made that point in my mind
Not trying
because
to
you
make
haven't
that
given
point.
us the whole the costs.
that's not a point I'm trying to make.
Okay, that's fine. And then I noticed this was attached to your, excuse me, this was from the building department. Maybe this is a question for you as well. You had a consultant do test for lead paint, just to, I guess why, just to know whether or not that was going to be an issue on the windows?
Right. Just so we understood what we're up against.
So there is some, the testing does show that there is some lead paint, which I wouldn't be surprised in a building of this age, and it's not a big deal to manage that through a restoration project, right? I mean, something you can do.
Can be done, yes. Yeah.
All right. Other questions for Mr. Robertson?
Yes, Ms. Wagner reported that there is not, nor is it anticipated that there will be capacity to properly maintain historic wooden windows on a recurring schedule or even during some emergency event. What kind, if windows were restored, what kind of ongoing maintenance and what frequency would you anticipate?
Well, like I said, probably looking at these things annually. And then if there's sign or indication, as Tom says, during inspections, if something's indicated it needs to be repaired, that's when it would be picked up. And Vivian's telling me we'd have to repaint them at least every 5 years.
Say again?
And Vivian here is telling me, the architect is telling me that they would need to be repainted at least every 5 years.
And the city has staff, I believe, that does painting, or you could contract for that, right? You just,
Yes, we could either
the city
contract.
just chooses not to make that investment? Is that what you're saying? Or?
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that if we put new windows in, that we would have to paint them within every 5 years.
Well, what is the sentence, I guess maybe I'll just, excuse me, Ms. Johnson. What does the sentence mean in the staff report? There is not, nor is it anticipated, there will be capacity to properly maintain historic wooden windows on a recurring schedule. What does that mean?
So I wrote that, and the meaning behind it is just what you've talked about here tonight. The building was restored in 1987, and you see where we are today. We don't necessarily have a historic preservationist on staff, nor do we anticipate having a historic preservationist on staff. So this is something that is a little bit specialized. And whether or not we really truly have the capacity as a city to properly maintain wooden windows is questionable based on past performance. So that's what I mean by that.
That's a fair statement.
That's very fair.
Because it hasn't been done at all. So. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Ms. Johnson. Did you have a
No, I
question?
mean, she just clarified where I was going with that. I wanted to understand.
Thank you. Other staff board questions for Mr. Robertson?
I want to thank you for our meeting that we had, and prior, just because I didn't mean to come off, I wasn't trying to be hard on you but I did want to, since we are on record, it is important for it to be on record that, you know, how this building got to the condition that it's in. So thank you for your tolerance of that. And I am happy that an outcome of that is that the city manager has commissioned you to, on a regular basis, put together a maintenance schedule for our buildings and for routine checks of them. So I'm very happy to hear that that is the new way we'll be doing things as a city.
Thank you.
I had some questions for Ms. Salaga. I imagine the board does too, but I would just, some time ago, I want to say maybe at least 5 years ago, maybe 10, I became aware, because happen to be a member of the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. Florida Trust paid a consultant to develop a computer program that would help a person identify the types of maintenance that need to be done based on the type of building, whether it's wood frame, whether it's brick. Perhaps you know about this, Ms. Salaga, but I remember seeing that. I don't know if it's a commercial application that's available, but it might be. It was specifically tailored to historic buildings as opposed to, you know, non-historic. So it might be something you could look into that might give you a framework to develop that maintenance schedule, because there are some other historic buildings left in this town, namely the train station is one, The old library is another that immediately come to mind, the Safford House, the city owns. And I think, I sure hope we're not going to see the lack of maintenance moving into those buildings too, but that's not what we're talking about tonight. So, but I would just encourage you to maybe talk to the Florida Trust or go online and see if there is such a program that might help you guys. It may be a cost to it, but at least it might give you some ideas about how to set that up.
And if I could make a follow-on comment, that it seems to me that the buildings that are listed individually on the National Historic Register should be treated differently than the city buildings in general.
And just for the record, this building, this old city hall, is individually listed on the National Register because of its individual importance to the overall town. Ms. Salaga, did you want to make a presentation, or did you just want to answer
no,
questions?
I thought you said you had a question.
I
I'm
do.
sorry.
I have a few, and I'm probably the board does too. You used a rating schedule of basically 1 to 5, or very good, good, fair, poor, and very fair. I mean, very poor, sorry. Can you just elaborate on the distinction between a 3, like a C, I guess, of fair, and what moves it into the poor or very poor category? What is it about the window itself that moves it into that category?
It primarily would have been the level of deterioration, the amount of missing window glazing that wasn't there, the amount of rotted wood or termite damage that one would find. If the window was, there were not many windows, as you can see, that were completely rotted out, where individual pieces of the window would have had to have been replaced, and the entire window sash itself. And it was the extent of the deterioration that we were looking at, primarily to see if the window could feasibly be restored, and those windows that were indicated in fair condition would have been the more easily restored of the group. Every window certainly could be restored and rebuilt, depending on the extent of the deterioration. It isn't that they can't be, but is it feasible in order to do that you would get a result that would meet the criteria of the current building code as well. And when we referred back to the building code, prior codes exempted historic windows from having to meet any of the wind loading and impact resistant criteria. If you were restoring the window, you could restore it in place without having to meet any of that criteria. The new 2017 building code has altered that criteria to the effect that if you restore the window, which you still can do, you must then additionally provide some kind of hurricane protection for that window in order to meet the code. The code then further makes a distinction that the hurricane protection at the second floor level of any building must be a permanent installation or can be applied to the window from the inside of the building and would not require anyone to get onto ladders or scaffolding in order to install the window protection. It's the code, and believe me, we are preservationists at heart. We walk the walk, we talk it, we live it. And the code in this recent round of revisions has not been as friendly to the historic buildings as we would have preferred it to be, but nonetheless it is there. And unless, well, and additionally to that, what we were looking at was the fact that the interior faces of the wood trim, the finishes of the building, were trying to be protected at some point in time with that window film that they put on the windows, which over time succumbed to the ultraviolet ravishes of just the environmental condition. And the window film, although window film between whenever that was done, which we could not find in any of the records, so it might have been back in that 1987 renovation of the building. Granted that the window film today is technically a better product, it would, windows that are true divided light are, again, not protected from impact resistance, or because the original casement around the windows was not installed, of course, pursuant to the manner of fastening that one would do today, based on the code requirements. There was no way to determine the nailing pattern of the existing building without damaging the windows irreparably. So those are assumptions we simply just could not make.
I noticed in the summary of the different options, it talks about storm windows and thermal interior inserts. Do you all bring, maybe Mr. Robertson, did you bring samples of those for us to take out today? And also, did you bring the new window that's supposed to be installed?
No, there was, as I looked at the staff report, there was a photograph of the replacement window in the staff report. The storm window is simply a single pane of glass to which one could apply muntins to, and we would, if that was an option chosen, we would opt to do it only at the meeting rail so that there would not be a visual distortion of the window pane muntin pattern underneath it. The storm windows on the second floor would have to be a permanent installation on the ground in order to meet the code. The exterior storm window.
Those storm windows actually go? Would they be like shutters that then are closed?
No, it's a single. It's, if you're familiar with storm windows from up north in the northeastern part of the country, they're a separate applied window that fits onto the exterior of the window like a screen, like a window screen would fit. And that is, that piece would be an impact rated element. It wouldn't meet the wind loading because it's simply an applied element to the exterior of the window within the casement. And it would, and according to the National Park Service preservation brief, there was an excerpt in my report from that brief on storm windows, and that can be made of wood, aluminum, vinyl, or plastic, whatever one would choose. In this instance, because the original windows are wood, I would recommend only wood for the storm window frame.
And can you see through that storm window? I mean, is it clear?
It's clear. It's clear glass. It could be low E so that it would deter the ultraviolet penetration into the building, which is the source of the deterioration of the interior finishes. But it can be applied. with low E and have an impact-rated glass in it. It just would not it couldn't be rated for the wind impact. The wind loading, pardon me.
So it would meet the impact resistance, but not the wind load.
Correct.
And can you describe and explain to us a little bit more what the thermal interior insert is? I assume that's on the inside of the building?
There was an option available for an interior thermal window that would look the same as the exterior storm window, and it would simply be, it would allow for additional protection from the air infiltration. The issue with the interior storm window, for lack of a better, or I guess an interior thermal protection is how they refer to it, is that that moisture collects in between because of the differential in the air temperatures. The existing window and the interior thermal window would create an environment for condensation within the two panes of glass.
Between the thermal insert
Between
and
the
original
thermal
glass.
and the original window.
So why is it being recommended if it creates a water problem?
Because there is an opportunity to be, if you drill a couple of holes into the frame of the thermal pane, it allows for the expiration of the condensation, and it diminishes the thermal protectivity, but it doesn't take it away completely.
I had a couple other questions. I noted when I read through the report of each individual window, I noted 8 different windows that you stated in your report have broken glass. Is the glass completely out of that? I'm assuming it's one light of the window, or it's the whole window, or
No, the glass, none of the glass is completely broken out of any of the windows. Many of the panes appear to have been replaced over time because it's not the original wavy glass any longer. Some of the panes were replaced with plastic, like a polyurethane material, and the window panes were cracked. In most of the windows, as I can recall, there was just perhaps one pane in each of the windows at which a broken pane of glass was identified. The broken glass was not extensive at all.
well, there were 8 windows.
8
ones I counted,
windows.
and 1 with chipped glass, so 9 total.
Right. But given the fact that those windows are 8 over, 12 over 12, or I don't recall the light pattern.
9 over 9.
But one pane of glass in a window sash of 16, fortunately, is not a lot.
I had one more question, then I'm going to go to the rest of the board. About how many hours were you on the site, and how many staff were on the site to do the evaluation of the windows?
We had 3 staff people on site, and we were there for 3 days in February.
So 24 hours, would that be fair to say?
24 hours each day? Oh, no.
No, I mean, 3 days, which is 24 hours, and 3
Right.
people. So you really had 24 hours times 3, which I guess is 72, if my math is right. So 72 hours of your time to physically on the site to look at the window.
Correct.
Okay. Other questions? Comments? And maybe for Mr. Robertson, is there some reason why you didn't bring the sample window and these other options so we could take a look at them? We usually see that from applicants when they're doing such a big change to windows?
There was a sample here at the earlier meeting earlier in the year, and we didn't contact the window company to provide that sample again for this hearing, because it had, from our perspective, because it had been here before, and from their perspective, I think they didn't think of it. I don't know. You'll
And
have to
I
answer
guess
that
what Mr. Perez is probably going to tell me is that we are only supposed to be considering what's going on in this meeting. I mean, January was a few months ago, so it's a little difficult to remember all the details of that particular window. And I do appreciate your verbal explanation of the other things, but it would have been nice to see these storm windows and a sample
I can say
of the.
that the windows are finished wood on the interior, and we received a sample from Marvin Windows that the interior would be stained to match the existing finish, and the exterior finish would be white in order to match what is presently there.
I guess maybe this is a dumb question, or maybe I missed it, but there's been a lot of information on this. Will the light pattern in the new window replace the existing patterns? In other words, if it's a 9/9, is it going to be a 9/9 new window? If it's a 4/4, it's going to be a 4/4?
Exactly. And we also, in the specification, specified, because the windows are custom made, the shape of the muntin will replicate the shape of the muntins that are presently there. They have the tools and the dies in order to shape and cut the material in order to match.
Other comments or questions for the applicant, either Ms. Laga or Mr. Robertson? Okay. This time I'm going to open it up for the public hearing. If anyone would like to speak to this item, please come forward and state your name and address.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and board members. Nita Protos, 901 Bayshore Drive. I was going to wait to the very last, but I am appalled that we are here again to protect a jewel of Tarpon Springs of historic preservation. I am appalled that after I left office in the late 90s and Mr. Vaticiotis left as city manager, that all maintenance stopped on our historic preservation buildings and the Safford House. I am appalled that the professionalism of supposedly said of our city manager didn't cover this. I was in office when we went through the renovation of this building, and we got all the historic establishments of our city in line. And we have a jewel here, and that's why you're on this board, to protect what we've got. Evidently, there is no respect or concern about what the history of this city is about. They can say they respect it, but when you let it go that long without any maintenance or termite protection, what does that tell you? You have money for everything else in this city, but you don't have money for your historic homes and buildings in this town. Every community has historic preservation. Some feel very strong about it, some don't. We feel very strong about our historic preservation in the city of Tarpon Springs, and we want it to stay the same as it is. Please do not change these windows. Have the city preserve and repair what we've got there. Let's make our city buildings and the Safford House the same as it should be. Let's not lose what we have. No maintenance records. When I called up here, I went to the gift shop over there, and I saw the condition inside and outside. And when I came to the city before the last hearing, I was told there was no maintenance. I got a letter from, and I didn't bring it. I can't find it, that they didn't have a timeline of maintenance on all our historic buildings in Tarpon Springs. And when you think from 2005 and 2006 up to today, do you ignore your home that long? No. And this is our home. Energy, elements, houses stay, buildings stay, but you have to take care of it. Please, stay with what we discussed at the last hearing. Preserve what we have. The city can do it, and shame that the city manager didn't do it at that time. Let's not lose our history to new concepts of construction. Remember, once you take it out, you can't replace it. Once you lose, you can't replace it. We are a proud community. We worked very hard for our historic preservation in Tarpon. Many, many months, citizens worked very hard, and they feel that the city has turned their back on them for what's happening now. And the termites, shame on us. We termite our properties, our homes. We take care of everything. It doesn't cost that much to termite our buildings and our homes. The city must have a plan. And if they don't, you talk to your commissioners and don't take the fact that they say they're doing it now. We want to see it in black and white. The time has come to step up and say enough is enough. Don't trash what we have in our community.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
Costa Vaticiotis, 538 West Cedar Street, Tarpon Springs. I just had a couple of comments I wanted to make, but to be honest with you, there's been a couple of curveballs thrown by the staff tonight. Now, I'm not sure how to react to it. As I mentioned to you earlier, as city manager and double-hatted as city engineer, in addition to Eddie Mullally's and the Neptune Lounge, I was responsible for the purchase of the Safford House and getting the restoration of that going. The City Hall restoration, which was a complete restoration where the windows were taken out, cleaned, preserved, and put back in. The Cultural Center, that's one thing I'm a little confused over. And then, of course, the Heritage Museum, we converted it from the old library to the museum that it is now. There was a complete renovation in 1987. I'm not going to dispute that. There may have been. At some point, there was some cultural activities there that were introduced, a movie theater at the one end and that sort of thing. But I can assure you, in 1990, when I was city manager, we did a ton of work on that building. I mean, we took the columns down, refurbished them, put them back up. Whatever needed to be done to the windows, we did those. The exterior was completely painted. The clock mechanism, we made sure that that was operable. The movie theater part of the cultural center was completely made over to what you see right now, which are theater seats. The floors were redone. Interior was completely painted, and so forth. I'm just a little bothered by that activity during that time frame not being mentioned to you by the city staff. I just don't understand that. My recollection is we had a grant for that money. The architect of record, my recollection, was Abel and Garcia, which was a Tampa firm. Jan Abel was the prime architect. She has passed away since then. I think they were the lead architects on the City Hall restoration as well. At one time, the cultural center was the city hall. The fire department was at the south end, and the police department was at the north end. Those were eliminated, and then I guess in 1987, the cultural element was introduced as far as having activities there, and I understand that. For tonight's purpose, I've read the engineering report, RFP, that was sent out, and also the response by the architectural firm. I believe that's who it was. And in that RFP, they talked about the windows. They were going to examine the roof and also the clock tower and the mechanism to see what can be done about that. I'm not sure about the roof and the clock tower. I guess we're just here about the windows tonight. First, I'd like to say, and I think everybody said this, the condition of the cultural center is simply deplorable. It didn't happen like that overnight. I mentioned something to City Commissioner over a year ago, and he told me something would happen this past December, and it didn't, and here we still are. I appreciate all this discussion about routine maintenance and things. I mean, you don't have to be blind to understand that nothing has happened. I mean, I don't even understand where preventive maintenance is even in the vernacular here. I mean, I don't even understand why it's even being mentioned. It's obviously that it hasn't. I mean, even to the extent that light bulbs aren't even in the exterior fixtures. I mean, there's no excuse for that. I want to remain constructive tonight, and that's all I've got to say about that. I mentioned to you what we did to the Cultural Center in the 1990s. I wanted to mention the roof. We were very meticulous in preserving the building as it was, even to the extent that the roof needed repair. Just like in the engineering service RFP, they want to examine the roof. We needed repair of the roof back at that time. The architect of record did their research. I guess they found a stamp on the back of the roof tile and actually discovered that it was made in a quarry in Italy. They contacted the quarry, and lo and behold, the identical tile was still being produced, and we imported that to make the repair on the roof. There was no questions, no request to change the roof tile, to replace the roof, or anything like that. There was no request to replace windows for the sake of energy efficiency, ease of maintenance, that sort of thing. We simply did it. The other thing is, and along that line, I want to mention that we didn't do any evaluation on the windows. I mean, the evaluation here that was done and presented to you, the bottom line on that is the windows can be restored. I don't know what more can be said. I mean, if they couldn't be restored, then that would be something. But from what I see is option one, I believe, is a complete restoration. It gives you an amount, and that's great. I think we paid $49,000 for that to be said. We didn't do that back in the 1990s. We simply did what we needed to do to keep the windows functional. We didn't pay anybody to tell us that's what we needed to do. On that note, I really call into question the, I'm not saying that the architect that did the analysis is wrong or anything like that, but it just doesn't sit well with me that there isn't a provision for a national, a building on the national National Register, that there isn't some provision for maintaining the windows as they are, regardless of whether you have to do the work in situ or remove them and restore them. I've looked for it. I can't find it. Maybe if somebody can point to me where that is. The other aspect I want to mention to you, that Pinellas County does have a Pinellas County Pinellas County Board of Adjustment and Appeals for the building department, Pinellas County Building Board of Adjustment Appeals, where you can actually ask them that question, and they'll answer that for you. And if there's an issue with it, you can ask them for an adjustment to the building code. And I think in this particular case, you're going to have a very good chance of getting whatever that restriction is waived. I do want to say that on a personal note, we recently purchased a historic bungalow in Greektown that was built in 1925, 15 years after the Cultural Center was built. It's got the same windows. I'd like to say the identical windows. They're 6 by 6, but it's the same windows, lead weights, cords, double hung. And I will tell you, my wife and I are going to preserve those windows. We're not going to restore them. It's almost silly to pay X amount of money to replace a window for the purpose of ease of maintenance and energy efficiency when there's so much maintenance that has to be done to the rest of the building anyway. Number two, our walls don't have any insulation in them. So I don't know what paying thousands of dollars to restore or replace windows with thermal efficient windows is going to buy us from Duke Energy. Not unless we insulate the walls as well. So I want to mention on that note that my wife and I, at least I do, practice what we preach in that regard, and that would be my recommendation to you to have the windows preserved as they are. The architect said they can be restored. They gave you an amount of money. There's some question as far as what the actual cost of replacing the windows would be. I just don't understand why they wouldn't be restored. I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing either, but I do want to say something, and this takes me back to my city manager days. That you, as a historic preservation board, are the conscience of this city for historic preservation. And there's been a clear tendency to move towards convenience, ease of maintenance, thermal efficiency, and that sort of thing. And the only thing I want to say in that regard is I believe it's your job to keep that trend in check. And I appreciate all the work that you're doing. I know you're volunteers, and I know your heart's in this work as much as anybody else in the city. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Good evening. My name is Jody Rubin. I'm at 1025 Eastern Way in Orlando, kind of a little far. I am here representing the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. It's the only statewide nonprofit for historic preservation. And our mission is to protect the preservation of the architectural, historical, and archaeological heritage of Florida through advocacy, education, and stewardship. We advocate for legislation that preserves the historic and cultural fabric of the state and our communities. And we sometimes mobilize our preservation network to take action on pressing preservation issues like this. I am personally uniquely qualified and positioned to speak to you today because first, I was Orlando's historic preservation officer for 15 years, so I understand the type of code that you all are looking at. I got involved in the construction industry, first in residential work and then in all types of construction, but historic buildings. And I've been involved in the window restoration business for the last 9 years. So pretty focused on where you guys are. So I actually inspected the Cultural Center in 2013 with the company I used to own. And I did note, yes, there's some rot and there's some termite damage, and there's definitely some missing glazing putty and some broken panes. I went back there again today on my way here, and they're still not very pretty to look at, that's for sure. And it's mostly because there hasn't been any proper maintenance. There's been some maintenance. I did see the caulking, some clear caulk on the inside of some of the sashes along the mountains in the auditorium area. But really, for the most part, there's been a complete lack of maintenance on those sashes and the window parts completely. However, they have withstood that neglect for decades, and here we are. They're over 100 years old, and they're still there. I also reviewed the reports, the letters, and the specs attached in the staff report, and if you'll indulge me a couple of items. If you look at the staff report and you look at the second criteria that you all use in looking at these items, has to do with the width and height of the windows and doors shall be consistent with the character of the building's original architectural style. Repair replacement should be based on accurate duplication, substantiated by evidence, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And so the report says that they're the same size, style, and color, but they're aluminum clad. And so when you have a clad window, the proportions actually are different than the original windows. Actually, I looked up these Marvin, what are they called? Generation 2, Ultimate Generation 2, or Next 2, or whatever they are. I looked them up, and actually the stiles, which are the vertical pieces on the exterior, and the bottom rail and the top rail are actually pretty close to original configurations, but that meeting rail in the middle, especially since it's an impact window, is almost twice as thick as a usual meeting rail. And so it gives a completely different visual appearance to the building, because the balance of horizontals and verticals just isn't right anymore. In item 5, the fenestration is an issue that's talked about. The size and mass or shape of the building shall be reflective of the original style, and all the bits and pieces, including the fenestration. Again, the fenestration will be different. Even if they match the grill patterns, the grills are going to be, they're not true divided light. And so if there are spacers between the glass, you'll be able to see those, because they're usually not the same color. And of course, you have white on the outside and dark brown on the inside. So you know, what color does a spacer end up being? Or there's no spacer, and then it just looks like grills floating in space as you're looking at the building obliquely. And then in item number 7, distinctive architectural features shall be repaired rather than replaced wherever possible. Architectural details, including color, materials, texture, you know, etc., should be consistent with the original architectural style and character. Well, again, you know, while they still may match the grill pattern, because it's metal, they're clad, they are not consistent. Repair is always the preference, right? With your code, repair is always a preference. And you know, that's not happening in this particular proposal. So as far as compliance goes with the building code, actually once I heard the architect say that the new code doesn't allow or requires protection on the upper floors for debris, right? Debris? Okay. I started texting my preservation architect buddies around the state, and I haven't only kind of gotten marginal answers so far, but I'm working at Vizcaya right now. I mean, talk about debris field and, you know, high winds, another 15 miles an hour higher than here. And we're looking at hurricane protection that they have to put up. We're restoring the windows and putting hurricane protection they have to put up. An armor screen, which is a Kevlar cloth, and it's not permanently applied, but it's something that can be used, and that's what their proposal is going to be. And they're probably going to use state funds to do it or FEMA funds to do it. There are ways to work within the building code to maintain the historic character of historic buildings. It's in the code. And then I won't go so much into the Secretary of the Interior standards, because that's also referenced, and the issues of retaining historic character, retaining distinctive features, and of course are being ignored in this application. And then of course deteriorated features, it says in the Secretary of Interior standards, should be repaired, not replaced, and if they are replaced, they shall match in design, color, texture, and other visual qualities, and if possible, material. There's no reason you can't do a new wood window there if that happens to be an option, if for some reason it's felt that restoration isn't possible. Quickly looking at the options chart that we have referenced already a couple times. The restoration and product costs only really, to me, also don't make a lot of sense either. If someone offered my company $2,600 just to restore a pair of sashes, you better believe I'd be right on it. That's a lot of money, versus $2,700 for an impact window. And that's just the material cost. So if the windows are replaced, okay, the impacts actually to the rest of the historic material in the building are actually quite significant. If you look at any of those interior shots on the in the architect's report, any of those windows, you can see there's a pretty extensive interior wood trim. So if you look at the specs for doing these windows, in order to do the new windows, what you have to do is you pull off the molding on the outside of the window, the brick mold it's called. It's right around the edges at the brick and the sides and the top. And then you would take off all the interior trim, which of course is 100 years old, and it's either cypress or pine, and it's brittle and hard, and you start pulling out nails, and you're going to have to replace it, most of it. So you have to pull out all the interior trim, you pull out the window unit itself, dispose of it, the window, the weights, the pulleys, all that old hardware, dispose of all that, and then you put in a bucking system, because there's a weight pocket in there that's, probably 3-4 inches wide on each side. So you put in a whole new bucking system, you put in the new window, and then jam extensions, because the window's only, probably just under 5 inches deep, and those walls are, probably 2 or 3 bricks deep, I imagine. So you do a jam extension, and then you have to remake all that trim and stain it, and make repairs to the plaster, or the drywall, or whatever's in there, and protect the floors and everything else. So the actual labor and material impacts for new windows and impacts to the historic materials is way more than restoring historic sashes. So when you do a window restoration, will you indulge me? Can I be away from the mic for a couple minutes? Kind of?
If you speak up so we can be sure.
All right, I'll speak up.
Yeah.
There's a microphone right in front of the chair here.
So I used to own a little company in Sanford, and we restored windows. And one of the things that we would do, I often give presentations. We show people, windows that they have in their own building, and they're usually pretty deteriorated. This one isn't as bad, I will admit, as some of the ones in the cultural center, especially the ones in the auditorium section. And this is a little bit newer with this type of balancing system. I'd say that these sashes are probably from the 1930s. So a little bit. You see the same types of conditions as you do in the cultural center. You have glazing putty that's missing. You have paint that is deteriorated, come off. Right? There's not really much rot in these, but you can see the corners have separated, and that's the moisture also. And then what happens in order to restore these, you just pull the sash back. It's a couple pieces of trim. The edges of the sash, pull the trim out. It's small, it's easily replicatable. And then you pull the sash out, you put them in a steam cap. We're not talking about harsh chemicals, we're not talking about anything. Put the sash in a steam cap. Steam softens that glazing putty, holds the glass. And you can easily pull out the old baby glass, film and all, it has film, and save it for reuse or discard it. And then once it's out, you sand it. You need to make any repairs. Dust repair here in the bottom, actually replace a muntin. Window part, dust and new muntin. These are the profiles that are used to make these windows are actually pretty we have all the profiles. So when a sash is done, get it to that point, always treat it with a borate. Borate product inside a pesticide will keep the sash rotted. Prime it very well with oil. Put the old glass in or new glass in. You glaze it. Glazing putty, which is kind of like Play-Doh, and it is your first line of defense. That, then you lap a little paint, lap a little bit of the paint on the glass, apply the bridge across the glazing putty to the wood, so that if there's any wind-blown rain, it goes right off. And you keep painting it every 5 to 8. And you paint them right top. And you'll notice that sash didn't look brand new, because it's not. I think that's all I have there. So, I know that you all are a certified local government, right? And I think all of you, or most of you, know what that is. So as a CLG, communities like Tarpon Springs really are held to a higher standard. You have to adhere to a set of federally mandated rules. You do federal reporting. You qualify for separate pots of federal money. You really are held to a higher standard. So a city-owned property should really undergo best practices in everything that's done, best practices. Florida Trust does it at our own building up in Tallahassee, and the city should do it as well. City should have a maintenance plan, and I'm glad to hear that something has been started. There's actually a very good preservation brief that the National Park Service put out about maintenance plans. And this board should really be an advocate for the building, which retains a high degree of its architectural integrity. So I hope today that you would vote to restore the windows, maybe provide some other type of protection, and some way to do some energy efficiency. There are way cheaper ways of doing it rather than doing a storm window or an insert. Things like solar shades, things like that, to help keep a lot of the heat out of the building. But there are certainly ways to maintain your historic appearance and character of your building, and still go closer to being consistent with today's building code. Thank you. That's all I have.
I do have a question, Ms. Rubin. When you recommend repainting every 5 to 8 years, you do that with the windows in place?
Yes, the windows could be painted in place.
And I don't know the answer to this question, so I'm asking blindly, is that regular repainting, is that one of the keys to maintaining the building and keeping the dry rot from occurring? Or is there other
regular
things?
painting is a great way to keep damage from happening. If you can, because wood moves, it's a natural material. And so if it moves a little bit and it opens up a little bit of a gap, then water will come in. But if you regularly maintain it, and maintain it right, not just, slapping a lot of paint on it, and they could be maintained either in place, so that you can seal them in place. It's a cultural center. How often are you really going to have the windows open, right? You have museum, you're air conditioned. So if you chose to not, use the weights and the pulleys and just fix the sashes in place, that's possible too.
Besides repainting on a regular basis, what else needs to be done for regular maintenance of window?
Keep the glass clean, clean it inside.
Thank you. Other questions?
I have one question. You had mentioned the interior, from looking at the interior of the
Yes.
windows, where the two windows meet.
Yes.
That
mold
in between would be much thicker. This particular does not lie within our historic district, so it was renovated. This current building we're in. So if I look at the windows that were historic windows were removed and new windows were put in, is that thicker? That's what you're talking about? We would have something that it's much thicker like that than what we see in the original windows?
No, this building doesn't have any doubled up windows. What I was talking about is a window sash.
Let me show you the picture I'm looking at where these windows come across. So where it would be fatter.
This.
Like those, like that there. Okay. Okay. They did, they went out. That's true. Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Talking about this part right here.
Right, that's what I'm talking about. So instead of it being like this, it would be like this. Well, or this, like two. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions for Ms. Rubin? Thank you, Ms. Rubin, and thank you for the audio visuals, or visuals. Other speakers this evening? And last chance, would this,
Good evening. My name is John Terrapini, 22 North Spring Boulevard. I'd like to speak to you from a couple different perspectives. One is a lifelong city resident who returned home from college and started buying old buildings in the downtown, and with my partners led the restoration efforts and led the redevelopment efforts on historic buildings. And I can't even tell you how many thousands of square feet we restored. Wood frames, wood doors. The city is supposed to be a leader. They have a historic, a National Register historic district. They have multiple buildings listed on the National Register of Historic Districts around town, individually listed. What kind of a precedent are you setting for people who live in the National Register district if you yourself won't live by the creed of restoration? It's not replacement, it's restoration. It's simple. It's not even a debate. Also, I was the president of the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. I sat on their board for 10 years. I hold the highest award in the state of Florida given for preservation, and there's not too many people who hold that award, the Carl Weinhardt Award. I live in a house that was built in 1887, and I don't have a consultant that comes and tells me when to scrape and sand and paint a window. It's kind of a self-evaluation. The city administration should be cited by their own code enforcement board for benign neglect. You wouldn't allow a homeowner to do the same thing in the National Register district as you're allowing your own city to do to the old city hall. I mean, the windows don't need to be replaced, they need to be restored. It's simple. I've done a lot of them myself, and I can tell you this, there's probably 50 windows in our house. 3 are new windows that were put in about 1986 or 87. And out of the 50 windows, there's 3 that need to be replaced right now. And which ones do you think they are? They're the new ones, because the wood's not as good and it rots out. And I've bondoed it, I've painted it, I've scraped it, I've bondoed it again. And at some point, they're just going to have to be taken out. But they're not the original windows. The original windows, if you sand them and you glaze them and you prime them and you paint them, they last. I'm doing 2 right now. They look like they were put in yesterday once they were sanded down. Other than they just need to be tightened a little bit. So there's things that need to be replaced in this town. The windows aren't one of them.
Any other speakers? I think everyone that's here has spoken, it appears. The applicant like to make any closing comments?
No, thank you.
I'm sorry, did you say no thank you? You didn't have anything further? Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, didn't hear you. All right, if there's no more public comment and the applicant doesn't wish to speak, I'm going to close the public hearing. It'll be back to the board for discussion. Let's have some discussion. It's a lot of issues we've heard tonight. We've had a lot of public commentary, a lot of detailed information from the applicant too. So let's have some discussion before we move to motion, please. Mr. Bolton.
Can I ask the city manager, this may seem redundant, but I just would like to hear it from myself, just to clarify my own, the city attorney, to reread the quasi-judicial announcement, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
This is a quasi-judicial proceeding where the Heritage Preservation Board acts in a quasi-judicial rather than a legislative capacity. At a quasi-judicial hearing, it is not the board's function to make law, but rather to apply law that has already been established. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the board is required by law to make findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the Code of Ordinances in order to make a legal decision regarding the application before it. The board may only consider evidence at the hearing that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues. If the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates the applicant has met the criteria established in the Code of Ordinances, then the board is required by law to find in favor of the applicant. By the same token, if the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has failed to meet the criteria established in the Code of Ordinances, then the board is required by law to find against the applicant.
Thank you. That clarifies a few things for me. As far as the application, there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice it and different points to be made. But looking at the given duty of applying what was presented against the guidelines, unless I'm missing them, I don't know that energy efficiency is found as something we're supposed to take into consideration. Ease of maintenance, financial hardship, or wind load are all. So taking all of those things out, and the architect said that the windows can be restored, I personally find my legal duty to deny the application is what I'm leaning towards. And if the commission wants to legislate and the city commission wants to take this as an appeal and approve it, that would be their thing. But that's kind of where I'm at. I feel like we're charged to review what was presented against the guidelines. The guidelines say, that we restore them. The architect said they can be restored. Energy efficiency, ease of maintenance, financial hardship, and wind load are not in our guidelines. So tossing those out, not using those as criteria to make a decision, that's kind of what I'm looking at.
I would add that I specifically asked the applicant if they were relying on the fact that it was whether or not it was their opinion that it was economically unfeasible to restore the windows as opposed to replace, and the answer was no. Because there is some discussion in the design guidelines that we can consider that if it's economically infeasible to do whatever the application is, but the applicant has said that is not their position, and I agree with you that energy efficiency is not in our guidelines, the cost to do it is not in our guidelines, but what we have heard tonight from an expert, Ms. Rubin, who I would definitely put as an expert in window renovation, window restoration, in the historic character, based on her experience as Orlando's preservation officer and her job today, she has told us that they can be restored. We've also heard the city's architects say they can be restored. It's a matter of, some are going to take a little longer, some are going to take a little less work. So we have two experts saying that yes, they can be restored, and economic feasibility is not an issue. The other thing I would say, well, I'm sure there's other folks who want to speak. Ms. Johnson, Ms. Milford, Paige?
Yes, I had a question. I agree with you on the restoration, but when she mentioned the code, I think maybe we need to see some other options, maybe the Kevlar and some of the other things that will not damage or take away from the exterior, as the guidelines say, restore it to where it should be. What are the other options? Can they bring that forward, the Kevlar and the other ways to secure it, to bring it to code?
Well, I think at this point, the applicant's request is to replace them. They're not asking to restore. So we need to act and decide on the applicant's application, which is to replace all of the windows. Depending on what happens by this board, if restoration comes back, then I think your point's well taken. There was a lot of information about it. I'm not clear as to what the building code does require, what are the different options. It appears from the two architects speaking that there are some options to meet the building code. That's not the applicant's request that's before us. But I appreciate your point. It's just that's not what the application is. Other comments?
Well, I think you clarify, so we cannot make a motion that includes one of the other options other than the option that they.
I don't believe so. I mean, the applicant's request is to replace the 38 windows and they're saying that it would be with the same lights, the same width, the same size. There would be custom windows to match the existing. I think that's the application that's before us. So that's what we need to vote on, that application.
I believe so.
You need to make it, I would agree, you would need to make a decision on that thing, but that does not mean that this board cannot instruct the applicant to restore the windows if you so choose. If you feel that that's a position that this board feels is the right thing to do, then they can put that into their motion and act on that. I mean, if you're going to require restoration, that just assumes that you're going to not allow the windows to be replaced. I mean, that's the assumption. So I think you can include both in your motion, and I would recommend and ask you to do so.
My only concern about that, and I mean, big picture, the discussion about restore, replace, and we can certainly make a decision tonight. I think we're prepared to make a decision. I think there are so many options about, and so much different information we've heard tonight about restoring them and what is required by the building code. Some folks are saying it's not required. The other person is saying it is required. There's a discussion about interior panels, there's discussion about exterior panels. So I don't, without more information, I'm not prepared personally to speak to that. But the big picture discussion about restore versus replace, I personally am prepared to make a decision. And if the board so wishes to make a recommendation after the motion, depending on what that motion is, it's up to the board if they want to do that. I had a couple other comments, and I think Mr. Bolton touched on some of those, and some of the speakers tonight did. Sometimes I think we in Tarpon tend to forget we're a certified local government. The benefit of that is that you're eligible for a separate pot of money for grants, which we are taking advantage of. Hopefully we will be awarded a grant for the updating the design guidelines. But along with those benefits comes the responsibility to hold our board and our historic district design guidelines and our ordinance to a higher standard. Additionally, I think the city-owned building, the city needs to be held to a higher standard. How can we as a city, I'm speaking in the collective we, because we're all the city, we are acting as a city board tonight. The city owns a piece of property, and the city's going to take the not the best practices, the less appropriate method for these windows. What are we going to do when the person comes to us the next month and says they want to do the same thing? And they only have 3 windows they want to take out. This is 38 windows. Every single building window in that building. I have a problem with that. I also have a problem that the lack of maintenance by the owner, the city created the problem that we are here for today. So we would be rewarding bad behavior by approving a renovation, a replacement. And the fact that the city staff has said that they will not maintain the building or the windows, I find to be completely appalling. And I cannot imagine that that is the policy of the city commission, that they're not going to maintain those windows. But that's a conversation for another day. And then the last thing I would say to the staff, and perhaps Mr. Robertson is not aware, I know our staff on the preservation board staff and the planning staff is, there are major grants for historic buildings that the minimum grant is around $250,000. It's a rigorous process. It is a competitive process, and it is subject to the whims of the legislature every year. But it's been pretty successful over 25 years in Florida in renovating major buildings. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that the building we're talking about, the old City Hall, when it was renovated, I am 99% sure that they got a grant from the state to do that. So there's that option to do that again if the city would pursue that. So that's all I have to say for this evening. Is there other comments, questions?
To just clarify what Ms. Orwell said, if we deny this application, we can at the same time make a recommendation for restoration.
Yeah, I would recommend that we do that if you I mean, given the testimony that's been given here tonight by not just the board but also by the citizens that have been here tonight, I think that it's justifiable to provide that just in case this application moves on to another board, so that you're clear that why you chose to, recommend that, you're clear on that, and that stuff that's provided in your record for your minutes.
I understand, and I would also recommend that we do so just merely as a time-saving measure. Do we want to meet again and talk about restoration if that's the direction we're going?
And I'd certainly be willing, I imagine the rest of the board would be willing to listen to the options on restoration and dig into that a little bit more with some of the folks that, that we know something about.
Can I ask just one question if you're going to go down that route? Can we just have a little bit of a conversation about what you're looking for is from, at least from the city, from a restoration perspective? What types of options are you looking for, and what information do you want us to provide so that we're clear when we leave here tonight, should the city manager or management decide to go down that restoration path, what we need to bring back?
All right, let me, if I can suggest, I think we need to deal with the application that's before us. and then we'll talk about other recommendations. So let's deal with those in two separate conversations and two separate motions. So are we ready for a motion for the applications on the floor? And the application by the applicant is to replace all of the windows. So the motion needs to address that. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll give it I make a motion to deny the applicant's request for option 7, but to approve option 1.
No, let's
Okay.
please, let's separate
Oh, you want to
our other recommendations.
Okay.
Let's just I think we really need to focus on whatever the application is before us, which is to replace all the windows. Let's make our motions specifically on that, and then we can talk about other issues, but we need to.
Can I have a point of order for a question? Once we make a motion and vote on it, isn't the applicant, what is there to discuss?
Yes,
You can't
If you want to do
that.
what staff is recommending, you should do it as one, because otherwise, once you either approve or deny, the application's over.
Correct. The board can always make other recommendations that related to an application. I think it's too much to talk about in a motion, quite frankly. It's just too complicated.
Well, if the board wishes to tie a recommendation to the motion or to the application, that would probably be the best procedure. Otherwise, you're just making a recommendation that's not tied to the application before you.
And the concern I have about that, and I mean, I'll certainly, I want to do what the board wants to do, and I'm only one vote, but I think we need to tread lightly about if we say big picture that we want the city to consider restoration, I think it's premature to say restoration as to which of those options, because there's not enough information here tonight. So I don't, and plus, that's not been requested. So we cannot act on something that has not been
So
requested.
the clarification is that a recommendation for restoration is an approval for them to move forward with restoration without coming back to this board. Is that what your question is?
Well, that's part of it, and I think there's so many options on restoration to be able to, how do you meet the building code? We don't really know what the answer to that is sitting here today. We want to make sure it does, and I'm not clear as to what would meet the building code.
Well, it's my understanding that the applicant would, if the applicant so chooses to restore as an option, they have to come back and show us the options for restoration.
It would depend on what that restoration means, as far as we would have to research what's required by the Florida Building Code and find out what that all entails. Because obviously, if we're applying some type of finish to the outside of a restored window, I mean, if the window remains wood and it's replaced in situ or with like material, then it may not require coming back. But if there's going to have to be some treatment on the window, certainly it's going to have to come back here, because storm windows are a significant change to what's there now. Whatever that may be. I mean, we've had a lot of discussion about different types of materials being applied to the outside or inside of these windows, which may effectively change their appearance. So those clearly would have to come back.
I would,
And again, we don't know
sample
that.
motion might sound like,
Why don't we let Ms. Johnson make her motion?
Okay.
I interrupt her inappropriate. If the attorney believes we should put it in one motion, then go ahead and put it in one motion, and we'll see if there's a second, and we'll see what the discussion is.
All right. I make a motion that we deny option 7 and approve option 1. And I would further include using a contractor who is experienced in restoration of old buildings with old windows.
For clarification, can we, when you mean option 1 and option 7, can you?
Option 1 being restoration.
And I guess that's where I have some concern, because I don't want to put the city in the position of saying that it doesn't meet the building code. So I would prefer if we don't say option 1, but we say that restore the windows.
Okay,
And
that's
then
fine.
if the city wants to come back, the applicant wants to come back and show us what restore means specifically, then we would entertain that in a public hearing. Would you consider that as an amendment?
And are you seeing option 1 and option 7 on the memorandum dated April 5th?
Yes, but I think now we're saying not replace the windows, but restore them.
So the motion on the floor, if I have this correctly, is to deny option 7 in the
Memorandum.
April 5th memorandum from Mr. Robertson, but recommend approval of restoration or approve restoration?
Recommend the city reapply with an application for restoration.
I'm confused why we even need to say what option, because the application does not,
Reference this at all.
in the initial application summary, it doesn't list the numbered options. Why can't we simply say that the application as submitted is being denied, and the staff and the board is recommending that restoration be considered as an alternative?
Do you consider that?
May I have a point of order? Is that allowed?
Very briefly, Mr. Vatican. Point of order, yes.
I'm listening to discussion. I've been there before as city manager. My recommendation, if you want to do complete restoration, is deny 2 through 7.
Right.
Because if you don't deny 2 through 7, you're going to leave whatever you don't deny open as subject to interpretation. And you could be very well back here again with another application and approve one. Okay. I don't know if that helps, but I just wanted to throw that on the table. Thank you.
Well, that was my concern about getting into the weeds about the options, and just seems to me we ought to stick with the big picture. Replacement is not what's recommended by this board. It's not what's approved by this board, and we highly recommend restoration. If they want to restore them, they're going to have to meet the building code. They're going to have to show us something new, and we'll vote on that at that time. But we can make a recommendation about what we think would be appropriate rather than just saying no. We're saying we think restoration of the windows would be the better solution. So with all that said, you want to restate your motion, Ms. Johnson?
Not sure. I make a motion to deny, I'll say options 2 through 7, and restore the windows.
And I think in your first time you said you recommend that they use an experienced contractor in old buildings and old windows?
Yes, it's my belief if you go that route, it's going to answer some of these questions around building code and whatever better.
Okay.
Chair, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to confuse the board further. I believe after the discussion you just had, I thought the simple motion might sound like deny the application as presented and recommend restoration.
Well,
I just, because you just said you didn't want to get in the weeds. I'm just trying to clarify. And
I personally prefer that we just say we deny the application for the replacement and we recommend restoration. That would be, because I think that gets us out of the options that are not really in front of us. But I didn't make the motion, so the maker of the motion needs to state it.
I make a motion that we deny option 7 and recommend.
I'd like to simply say that
Well,
the board
hold on a
recommend.
second. Her motion is on the floor is to deny option 7 and recommend restoration and use an experienced contractor in old buildings and old windows. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay. Is there more discussion on the motion?
Yes.
There can be a motion, another motion if this does not carry.
There can.
Thank you.
Okay. I move that
No, we have to wait. If you want, you
so
can.
what do I have to do?
You could amend this motion.
I
You can recommend to amend it, or you can. Or we're going to vote on this one.
Right. Okay. I recommend that we amend Ms. Johnson's motion to simply state that the board is denying the applicant's request to replace 38 windows with historically appropriate aluminum-clad wood replacement windows. The board recommends restoration, period.
Is there a second to the amendment?
I'll second.
Second to the amendment. So the amendment, first we're going to vote on the amendment, then we're going to vote on, and then if the amendment passes, it'll be almost a new motion. So I believe that's correct.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So the motion was to deny the applicant's request to replace 38 windows, I think you said with aluminum clad material.
It's exactly how the application.
Oh, I'm sorry, I've lost that part of my. Okay, so the motion is to deny the applicant's request to replace 38 windows with historically appropriate aluminum-clad wood replacement windows, and the board recommends restoration. Is there any more discussion on that? Are you ready to vote on the amendment? Madam Secretary?
Read that.
The motion is to deny the applicant's request to replace 38 windows with historically appropriate aluminum-clad wood replacement windows, and the board recommends restoration instead. That's the motion. That's the amendment. It's been made and seconded, made by Ms. Page, seconded by Mr. Bolt. Any further discussion on that? Okay, Madam Secretary, would you call the roll on the amendment, please?
Ms. Milford?
I agree with the motion.
Says yes or no?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Page?
Yes.
Mr. Bolton?
Yes.
Mrs. Terrapini?
Yes. So that amendment passed 5-0. It basically replaced the original motion, but do we need to vote on the new motion?
You do. So now you are now on the amended motion.
So the amended motion that's on the floor is to deny the applicant's request to replace 38 windows with historically appropriate aluminum-clad wood replacement windows, and that the board recommends restoration. That's the motion on the floor.
That was
It
an
is, but
amendment.
the amendment replaases the new motion, so you have to
Now we
vote
do vote
again.
on the-
Correct.
So that motion is on the floor. Is any further discussion? Are we ready to vote? Madam Secretary, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Milford?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson? Ms. Page?
Yes.
Mr. Bolton?
Yes.
Mrs. Terrapini?
Yes. So the motion passes 5-0. And I hope that the staff will convey, and I believe the minutes should, and certainly the videotape reflects that there are a variety of reasons cited by not just citizens in appearance today, but by the staff, by the board in the reasons for this. It's not just the motion, but there's a group of documented reasons why the motion was made and why it was approved this way, and I hope that that will be conveyed to the applicant. Our last agenda item. I just want really briefly, is there any staff comments? Michelle, you do? Please, briefly.
First, I'd like to personally apologize to Mr. Vaticiotis. I looked for records of rehabilitation, and I looked for records of things that had gone on at the cultural center. I wasn't able to locate them, but I want you to know that I have a deep appreciation for the stewards of this community. There are several here tonight, and I didn't leave it out of disinterest, so I'm sorry about that. Another comment is a thank you to David Bolton. He has been a dedicated member of the Heritage Preservation Board for 4 years now. He has been a servant to this city for many years and will continue to be a servant to our city for many years, and we appreciate your service greatly. This is his last meeting tonight, and he will be missed.
Thank you.
You will be missed.
That's all.
I had two things. One, I loved your little postcard that you sent out, very positive, very upbeat. Everybody saw it, celebrate historic preservation. I thought that was great. Keep it going on that. And then really quickly, I passed out the 2018 public hearing schedule. Just if y'all would take a quick peek at this, let's decide now. Make sure that none of these dates are going to be problematic. And I'm specifically looking at the ones around July and September, the holiday. So our meeting in July is scheduled to be July 9th. The 4th of July is the Wednesday before that. Is that a problem for anybody? Okay, and the September meeting is September 10th, and it's a full week. Labor Day is September 3rd, so our meeting will be a week after Labor Day. Does that present a problem for anybody? Okay, so I just want to bring that up and make sure everyone has the schedule. Please put these dates on your calendar, except for Mr. Bolton, who enjoyed serving with, although not long enough, would rather have served longer, and really appreciate your service and great steward. Other comments, board comments?
I'll just say thank you. It's been a great season on the board, and I've enjoyed working with all the various staff that have come through. It's been very, very educational. I'm a lifelong member of, resident of Tarpon, and do plan on continuing to serve. And other places where opportunities may arise. And want to thank you all. So I'll be, of course, keeping an eye on things. So you might see me up there
Put those dates on your
at
calendar.
public comments, I'm sure. Thank you.
If there's no further business to come before the board, it's now 8:40 and I'm adjourning the meeting.
I think it-